legendary and billionaire investor Carl Icahn, who joins me by phone. Carl, look, you've had 45 years in the investment business. You've seen all kinds of stuff. Is it correct to say that markets historically bounce back quickly from overseas military action? Will they bounce back quickly this time, Carl?
Yeah, that's a big question, Stuart. I think that this market possibly is overreacting to what's going on in the Ukraine, but I don't think that's the problem we have. I think the problem we really have is a much deeper one, which is inflation. And I know a lot of people say that, so I'm not giving you new news. But I think inflation is a major problem for us. And I think that is what we have to deal with. I lived through it in the 70s, and it's not easy to put that genie back into the bottle.
Carl, I was in the 70s too, and I remember it very well. And
Okay,
I remember inflation took off towards the end of the decade and really stayed with us for a very long time. And it wasn't until Paul Volcker at the Federal Reserve raised interest rates dramatically that we eventually got rid of inflation. Do we have to do the same thing again this time around?
I believe that eventually it's going to come to haunt us. But I can't tell you when. I don't think anybody can predict the exact timing of a market. And anybody trying to do it is just, I think, wasting time. But you can, I think, look at a macro picture, and, you know, if you lived this before, and you have to realize that at this point, we're sort of at a precipice. When it's going to happen, though, could be 3 years, 5 years, you don't know, or 3 days. I think that a catalyst was this Russian-Ukrainian thing, but I think we should be able to get through that.
When you say we're at a precipice, do you mean like on the edge of a huge sell-off?
Well, we already had a sell-off, so you already had 10%. But I don't want to be an alarmist because I'm not sure, nobody's sure when this is going to happen. But you're building toward it. You can't keep pumping money into an economy. You can't keep just printing up money. I mean, then it gets to a logical conclusion, which is absurd, that nobody has to work. And indeed, some of the left-wing Democrats are saying that if you feel like working, work. If you don't. And you can't have that. By definition, you can't have it. So eventually, we're pumping money in. We're buying some stocks are priced in an absurd fashion. And it just actually makes no sense considering the prices of these companies.
Are you a Bitcoin or a crypto kind of guy?
I tell you something, I studied them, I looked at them, I freely admit I can't understand. I really don't understand them. And if I can't understand something, you know, I'm an old school guy, so I buy value. So I can't understand what it is. I don't say they're no good, and I don't say they can't be good, and I'm not telling people to sell them. But I can't buy something I don't understand.
I'm laughing, Carl. I'm laughing because you and I are pretty much the same generation, and I'm sitting on the set with a young lady who is half my age, and she's very enjoying this conversation about Bitcoin because we've had this conversation before. I don't understand it. To me, it's a gambling chip, but there you go. One last one, if I may, Carl. The HBO, they released that documentary about you, and in it, you say there is, quote, no democracy in corporate America. You want to spell that out? What's wrong with corporate democracy here?
Well, I mean, it's a real problem. And I think, Stuart, that you hit the nail on the head here. We do not have accountability. There are good companies. I want to preface it. There are good companies, well-run CEOs, but the reason over the years we made so much money is going in and cleaning up the mess in a lot of these companies, or at least giving advice that has worked well for them. We don't have a system, even politically, which is flawed in many ways. If you don't like the president, you get rid of him in 4 years. You have an election. Some people argue how fair the election is, but at least you have it. Here, there's no election. You can't. It is extremely difficult to have a proxy fight, and unfortunately, the SEC is making it even more difficult. So I think that one of our problems is that you have people running our companies that are not equipped to run them. They're over their heads, but you can't get rid of them. It's that Peter principle 3 times removed. As a result, you don't produce as much goods as you could in our economy. You absolutely aren't using the power of these companies. You don't use the productivity of them. As a result, and this is not the only reason for inflation, but this is one of the reasons, a major reason, that we're not productive, and as a result you have inflation, and it would take me an hour or two to go into all the other manifestations of this problem that we have.
But we got that problem.
And so we have to really change the system in a lot of ways, and I think we're going in the wrong direction toward it, not in the right direction. And now, in fact, I mean, and I don't think that's the trouble with corporate democracy, but the problem we have today is that we are going to have more and more, or we have inflation tremendous in oil pricing. I mean, just a year ago, oil, we were buying oil at minus $35. I wish I could have bought more of it, but we obviously couldn't.
Now we don't.
Because we needed storage. We needed storage at one of the refineries we own. Well, we own a big piece of. But
Carl,
what I'm saying is now look at it, $100. Nobody would bet on that.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons is, believe it or not, that you're paying a stealth tax. The consumer's paying a huge stealth tax of over $40 billion in something called RINs. And these RINs are an anachronism. They were put into effect in 2005 to make for energy independence.
Carl, I've got to jump in. Carl, I'm terribly sorry. I'm coming on one of these hard breaks. You know how that works. So I've got to take a commercial break. But I want to thank you very much for being on the show, Carl. You're an icon. An icon, I should say.
Okay.
You've heard that before. Come back and see us again soon, Carl. Thank you very much.
Okay, Stuart. Right. Thank you. Okay.